Wasted. You died.
Game over, yeah!
There's a million different games out there for you to pick up and play right now. From roguelikes to idle games, colorful Excel spreadsheets and interactive movies, to everything in between. There have never been more games to play and die in absurd ways. What possibly made you think you could survive a fall from that high up? Have you tried not shooting a rocket launcher directly at your feet? And I'm not sure if you knew this, but you need to level ADP. As long as video games have existed, they've ended. That sounds really dramatic, but they've at least at some point stopped you from going forward. In a game like Super Mario Sunshine, which is a linear platformer where you go either from area to area or level to level, at a certain point, developers need a way to tell you to stop, because games don't go on forever. It's not like there's a developer on the other side of the screen watching you play the pachinko level and secretly working on 25 more for you to play. In Super Mario Sunshine, you get told to stop all the time, like natural barriers surrounding the map and invisible walls. In other games, these hold true as well, but you might be stopped in different ways, like a required boss fight, or a mechanic you don't have access to because you haven't completed a certain quest. Pokemon is infamous for its roadblocks, which is basically just a fancy invisible wall that has some dialogue. In Black and White, you have to deal with being stopped because these random people are busy dancing. The one that personally infuriates me the most is Sword and Shield's first roadblock, which are these Wooloo that are sleeping, and thus I'm forced to move 3 feet to the right instead to get around them. Like, wake up! Game over screens, and for the purposes of this video, death screens, they're kind of like the same thing, you know, are an extension of this idea. In the most literal sense, it is a developer telling you to stop. Halt. There's nothing you can get out of throwing yourself off this ledge over and over again, but please stop doing that. Going back in time, the idea of a game over screen was just this, telling you that the game is over and you should probably stop hogging the arcade machine because little Timmy wants a turn. You only had a set amount of lives to go through, and when you ran out, that was it. Conceptually, this idea has stayed pretty consistent through the years, only evolving as games have gotten more and more complex. You would start seeing things like stingers, more dramatic game over screens. Others were just absurd or just way too funny to not intentionally go out of your way to see. Some were just downright creepy, because who decided that this was necessary for Shadow of the Colossus? Because oh my god. Ultimately, this was all the way for developers to really immerse you in a game and in some aspects truly show you the consequences of your actions in greater detail. In that way, just as games have evolved and gotten longer, the punishment for a death or game over screen eventually changed to adapt. Could you imagine playing like 50 hours of a game and because you happen to die once, you have to start all over again? Depending on the game, there's pretty reasonable consequences to dying, usually just being sent back to the nearest checkpoint or at least the beginning of the current area or mission. Of course, that can bring its own set of issues, like getting a shitty checkpoint in Halo 1, but it's either this or restarting the game. You choose. The anxiety of losing progress is part of the reason that some checkpoints have sort of transcended past the, oh nice, a checkpoint, to thank you merciful God, there's a bonfire here. The save rooms in a franchise like Resident Evil represent this pretty well, where outside you have to deal with horrific monsters, but inside, these specific rooms, you know you can take a minute to catch your breath and probably sort through your inventory. Anxiety as a whole is a majority of the reason that game over screens are as memorable as they are. I'll talk about the aesthetics of some of my favorite death and game over screens in a bit, but level with me for a second. In my opinion, for most games, it's not really the game over screen that sticks with you after a while. What I remember the most is the thing that leads up to my death, because the death screen is usually just a byproduct of me choking at the last second. I'll try my best to explain this, but let's take Majora's Mask for example. For those unaware, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is a game where the moon is falling, and Link has 3 days to fix it. Link can travel back in time over the course of this 3-day period as often as he needs to stop the moon from falling. Throughout the entire game, you can look up in the sky and see the moon getting closer and closer. There's this scary ass clock tower that you can hear from literally anywhere in the game. There's a timer constantly at the bottom of your screen telling you how much time you have left before the moon falls. And on top of all of this, there's title cards that show up on the screen each day and night telling you how many hours you have left. So, multiple choice quiz, guys. What do you at home think happens when time runs out in Majora's Mask? big surprise, there's a cutscene where the moon falls and destroys everything. It was a really hard one, guys, I know. This cutscene is cool, and seeing the consequences of your actions is even cooler for a game like Majora's Mask. What I'm trying to say is that it's not a surprise this happens. You're explicitly told this is going to happen from the moment you start the game. See, like, look, right there, the moon is in the title card, it's just right there. So what makes this moment so impactful is the anxiety surrounding the event. The clock constantly ticking down as you play, each action costing you valuable time you need to save everyone. I'm sure every single person watching right now could comment down below a moment in a video game where they were so close to dying, but didn't. Or perhaps that one time they managed to just run it down and somehow it worked. A lot of my personal favorite game over screens and death screens are absolutely oozing with style or a strong aesthetic direction, being made in an era of games where technological advancement allowed developers to push the bounds in narrative storytelling. For example, back in 1997, Final Fantasy VII was the most expensive game to develop ever, telling an expansive narrative story and taking advantage of expensive 3D full motion video to tell that story. It's novel then that the game over screen is a ripped film reel, as if you ruined the movie by dying. This concept was changed in the remake, where the game over screen is now instead showing the live stream, which for people who don't understand, it's a different way to say that everyone's dead and has returned to the planet. It's still good, just, different. One of my favorite game over screens comes from the 360 or PS3 era of games, specifically in the Assassin's Creed franchise. For those unaware, the Assassin's Creed series of games involves going back in time through reliving your ancestors' memories using a machine called the Animus. At least it used to. I have no clue what they're doing nowadays. In Assassin's Creed 2, the entirety of the actually interesting gameplay takes place inside the Animus. And so a wonderful detail included in the game was the idea of the simulation breaking down the closer you get to death, and eventually desyncing entirely. Aesthetics in general are something that play a large role in a death screen or game over screen because honestly, they are 90% aesthetics. All game over screens could just be black with white text saying, game over, man. And that'd get the job done, but it feels more immersive to have something with a solid theme. For hyper-violent games like Doom or Dead Space, seeing a drawn-out death animation where your character is ripped apart adds to not only the horror aspects, but the tense atmosphere surrounding what a death means. The anxiety of it. Undertale has one of my favorite death screens because of how comforting it is. For a game where the proper ending involves befriending every single person that otherwise is attempting to kill or undermine you in some way, it's a nice feeling that despite my failure, I have a message telling me to push forward, which is seemingly an underlying theme throughout the entire game. This is something shared with Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, of all things, which thankfully my friend reminded me of. Thank you, Quite. When I played this 2009 game, I didn't quite understand the idea of an RPG because I was a bit young, so I ended up losing a lot of battles, especially to one of the first bosses in the game, Coughing and Zubat. Thus, it was pretty cool, but also sometimes frustrating, to see that not only does your partner have special dialogue for you, but there's special dialogue for the bosses as well, where I got called a pushover by a fucking Zubat. There's a thunder in your future, man. Just wait till you get my fucking hands on you. No game over screen makes you feel better, or possibly worse, than the game over screen of a competitive multiplayer game. In a game like Counter-Strike, if the general vibe of the match is that you're getting absolutely pummeled, having to listen to easy for ents at the end of every round up until you're told you lost is certainly disheartening. But every game has to have a loser. So on the flip side, steamrolling an enemy team just feels that much better. Getting to see if you ranked up, getting what is equivalent to a quarter flicked at your forehead by Valve, it's all, it gives you that rush of dopamine that online multiplayer games are looking to really extract from you. Call of Duty was innovative at the time for including the final kill cam in a match, where the entire lobby gets to watch someone get either the worst kill of their life, or get absolutely demolished by the craziest 360 you've ever seen. This concept eventually evolved into the play of the game, popularized by Overwatch, and eventually taken over by the real version of Overwatch 2, Marvel Rivals. Ultimately, I think there's no greater game over screen than the credits. The culmination of your entire playthrough is greeted by a heartfelt screen where everyone who worked on the game gets a moment to shine, or even you, the player, are specifically thanked for playing the game.
Thank you so much for playing my game.
I mentioned Undertale before, but a certain ending in the game ends with a playable section where every single Kickstarter backer is launched at you, and dodging all of these people who made the game possible is graded at the end. Pokemon used to have these wonderful end credit sequences where after a long journey, your character rides their bicycle all the way home back to their mom, and instead now we have Ed Sheeran, which on its own listening to Ed Sheeran is bad enough, but what really gets to me is that for a game where they refuse to voice any of the main characters. Ed Sheeran, of all people, is a voice I have to hear. I don't think any game credits, for me at least, will top Portal 2's ending. I could try to sit here and argue for God of War 2018's Walk Down from the Mountaintop or GTA 5's Needle Drop, but the double whammy of the turret opera leading into Once You Gone and finally concluding with Wheatley's reflection on everything that happened before he finally says, "The end?" That, for me, is the greatest game over screen, going off a loose definition of it I made up for this video. Whatever you might consider the greatest death screen, game over screen, or credit screen, I think we can all agree that across the ever-changing and adapting landscape that is video games, the idea of something staying mostly the same since like the 90s is pretty neat. At least I think so. I don't know. I guess like none of this video mattered if you only play a game like Slime Rancher where there is no game over screen and you can't die. So who cares what I'm talking about? Okay, bye-bye. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and follow me on Twitch now immediately. I want you to watch my Twitch streams now, please.